Hello there, it's Rye again with another Birth of the Federation video. Last time I covered the top 5 most misleading bits of information, but this time around I'll be highlighting some helpful tricks that may have an immediate impact on your game sessions. These are relevant to both single player and multiplayer, so whether or not you play the game only casually, you may still learn something new, I hope. So stick around. Although this will be geared towards getting beginners up to speed, I would welcome longtime players to sit down for review, or just to relax to the nostalgia blast many feel when they hear this game. Jumping straight away into number 1. Buy ships and structures before the last turn of construction. There are some notable exceptions, but buying things at some point before the 1 turn remaining note is usually a good rule of thumb to save yourself a lot of trouble. Some people don't know, as it's not explicitly stated, but the industrial output shown in the System tab is only a snapshot of last turn's result. This means that if you suffer a morale penalty the next turn, like from a lost battle, that will factor in before construction is completed. For further optimization, consider reallocating population along with any purchase, which is a step overlooked. Industry for that turn will not be useful, aside from producing a minimal amount of extra credits. So you're typically better off throwing population into a sector like Intel or Research to make sure you're using all population points efficiently. A time when you might want to let something in queue build normally is when your industry is so high that you can pump out a good warship or a key structure in 2 turns. 2 turns being an awkward number, as 50% completion in 1 turn is indeed fast, but it makes buying on the last projected turn a bit unnecessary when you could build the ship for free just using local industry. If you have very high morale, especially on a system with morale-raising structures, buying a 2-turn object may be suboptimal, especially if credits are low. Number 2. Utilizing blind spots. Now, anyone who has played the game for even a short time would see the apparent mismatch between ship movement, ship range, and scanner range. Specifically, ship movement and scanner range taper off on a diagonal axis, presumably since a sector of space is shorter horizontally or vertically, as far as realism is concerned. The key point, however, is that ship movement does not follow this same constraint for the diagonals, a feature which has major implications for strategy. As someone who had, at one point, played single player only, I was first a bit perplexed at what seemed like an inconsistency that the game devs could have corrected during playtesting. Playing multiplayer for the first time, however, I realized that this feature, or bug, actually influences the game loop for the best. Anyway, diagonal moves make fleet confrontations a bit interesting, as task forces can move out further than they can see on their own. Often, players will be compelled to send out scouts in those directions to monitor these blind spots as their larger task forces advance. Of course, your competitors are going to be anticipating these moves, so sectors along these diagonal axes, even more so than others, may very well be contested by smaller groups of enemy ships. In order to successfully scan the area, you would need at least some of these scouts to survive. Retreating is fine, but retreating scouts are penalized by being displaced 1 sector away from the intended target, diagonally, at random. As a player, you will need to decide how many ships you will need to peel off your main fleet to escort these scouting parties as you feel around. It's usually not an easy call, as you may want to preserve your strength for a larger battle that may be coming in the future. To conclude, movement isn't just about closing in on the enemy to destroy them. It's also feigning, provoking, threatening, and just throwing the enemy off balance long enough to give you an advantage. As cool as the large battles are, much of the interesting tactics happen at the galactic map level, where 2 or more players poke around with their fleets to get a feel for the power and positioning of the competing forces. For example, with a sudden strike from outside scan range, you could pressure an opponent to reveal his fleet to you, while yours remains hidden. Moving diagonally also can allow you to skirt around the vision of your opponent, which can be great for both surprise attacks or a hasty retreat to hide your fleet from sensors. Or maybe you want to draw in their fleet to a disadvantageous position on the map while you strike elsewhere. Whatever the strategic choice, this standoff in PvP ends up being a sort of dance. A dance with death, that is. And it's a very important one at that, as it can end in premature game-ending explosions if one is too careless. Number 3. Morale battles. Morale is a very crucial game mechanic here. Not only does it impact the rate of production and money generation, but it also weighs heavily in research progress and internal security. For this reason, prudent players should always be looking for even small ways to earn morale on a turn-to-turn basis. This method works regardless of game settings. It is the intercept and hail tactic. The intercept command essentially allows you to automatically engage up to a radius equivalent of the slowest ship's range and speed in the task force. There is only one restriction. That is that the enemy must pass through one of your own colored sectors. Destroyers, or raiders, are the best class of ships to get started with, but once a task force intercept success chance is above 80-ish%, there's no reason why you couldn't add in heavier vessels to tag along. As far as the morale boosting goes, typically the opportunity will arise after just meeting another major race, or an explorer minor race that is scouting your territory. Small raiding parties can be targets as well, but lone weak scouts are much easier to press into a retreat. Instead of destroying these vessels, however, one could hail instead. The advantage is that you will avoid angering the race this vessel belongs to, but you will still benefit from a victory as long as the intruder flees. The same holds true for engagements that involve a cloaked ship. It will still retreat if your force is clearly superior, but your ships will simply be idle. After retreat, the intruder will be displaced diagonally, and where of those 4, direction is totally random. It could be deeper into your own territory, which sets up for another easy interception. Or even better, they may retreat outside of their supply range, leaving them stranded. In that case, you can instead switch to an engage command and fly over to wherever the intruders are displaced to repeat the process. Also, instead of obliterating your pesky Shellyak neighbor, why not have them flee before you instead when you hail them? Not just once, but for 50 turns, in a row. This is actually the best morale boosting loop, but it requires a spacefaring minor race nearby that is weak enough to be intimidated into retreat. Just remember that some mods enable firing some weapons while in retreat. This adds an element of risk, and also requires more investment from the player, as you need to bring vessels sturdy enough to survive an initial volley. At worst, you may need to rotate out ships that are damaged from this encounter, as losing too many key warships early on could leave you vulnerable to an early assault from the AI, or a human opponent. The earliest stages of the game are often the most dangerous, as even a small numerical advantage in ships can make a huge difference in the outcome of minor skirmishes. For this reason, you want to be careful about how many vessels you splinter off to chase for easy victories. Lastly, there is one more way to squeeze the propaganda lemon, and that is by leaving an AI empire alive.
Never leave the Empire without an enemy.
By leaving a few systems under their control, they'll still be able to build a few ships, which you can dive on to destroy for more propaganda value. That way, you can keep your morale high and save the 50-point morale reward for a time when you'll need it more. Bombing systems, preferably with minimal force, can also be used to rack up easy morale for most of the major races as well. I must emphasize minimal here, as destroying too much infrastructure before you capture the system can be wasteful. So, think twice before letting 30 upgraded heavy cruisers wipe out a strategic system. But anyway, I'll get more into that in a later video. For now, just know that this particular morale boosting tactic is situational, and that wiping out a rival empire as quickly as possible can still be the best option.
They have escaped. Our forces have defeated the enemy.
Number 4. Orbital assault methods. Although overcoming the enemy fleet is almost always the looming priority, knowing how to siege systems is often a crucial step in closing out games. There are often different ways to do so. and they depend on the situation and the faction you selected. If you're new, you might run across the strike cruiser. The game labels the role of these vessels as planetary assault, and this may sound promising when glancing at the stats. They have tons of torpedoes, which weigh heavily when the game calculates how much damage you do in a planetary attack. However, the problem isn't with firepower, it's with their defenses. The original game manual actually states that orbitals only do half their normal damage to strike cruisers when in a 1-to-1 ratio, but in-game this was either omitted or forgotten by the devs before release. Combined with the poor base armor on all strike cruisers, this makes them a total joke versus any well-defended system. Now you could sacrifice light scout ships to act as cannon fodder for these strike cruisers, but that beats the purpose of investing in them. That, and the fact that a level 2 strike cruiser can cost 12,000 apiece. Yikes. The good news is that some major empires, namely the Federation and Cardassians, have a wide array of heavier cruisers that can easily survive 1 or 2 rounds of orbital assault. However, not every faction in this game has this advantage. This segues quite nicely to the next method I will discuss. That is that you can bypass orbitals without even destroying all of them. I know, sounds crazy, right? That is, of course, if one doesn't manually try to reorganize the groups in that sector before the next turn. There is a bug that randomizes what orbital batteries target should you redeploy any of the vessels in that sector. Basically, this means there's a small risk that a grouping you didn't want to take fire will end up getting it. This can, at least on occasion, be disastrous, in which whole chunks of your best fleet will suddenly be wiped out by orbital defenses. The thing to note about task force arrangement is that the highest ones on the list also act as the first wave in any orbital attack, which will be targeted first. A good workaround is to have a larger group of higher experience level that will rise to the first wave, preferably before you move to the system you wish to attack. For example, if the majority of your fleet is regular, then that means a large and mostly veteran group that you sorted would typically surpass the rest in the list at some point. Note that it won't always immediately sort out, so being safe here also means being patient. It may take a few more turns for task forces to be in order the way you want them. You'll also be well off hunting for the least defended systems. Signs of a poorly defended system are a low ground combat value, lack of bunker network or planetary shields, or a very low population. Number 5. Scrap economy. Any true BOTF guide without the mention of ship scrapping would be a sham, especially where the multiplayer scene is concerned. Love it or hate it, it would probably be better for me to discuss the controversies of the tactic in a different upload, as there is a bit to unpack there on its own. Anyway, on to the main point, about how the actual vanilla game plays out with scrapping. The first thing to consider before anything else is that BOTF has a real problem with economy. And that's even before you consider the odd scrapping return value of 100% money back on all ships. For example, there is something called Ship Population Support, which is shown in the left side of the UI in the main screen. The higher the support, the less the maintenance costs of your vessels will weigh on your economy. These modifiers favor the Klingons, Cardassians, and to some extent the Romulans, but in practice, these marginally higher values are not significant enough to even the playing field, at least not on their own. Note that this is the case even after developing your native systems, which often takes too many turns anyway to be a viable strategy on low-tech setting especially. The only hope for a non-Federation or Ferengi player is that there could be a fully developed minor race that could carry your economy along when membered. In order to grow your forces in a state of negative credit flow, regular scrapping is often crucial. Now, the Federation and Ferengi will be much less reliant on scrap, but even with their better economy, they will too run into a point where rapid growth, militarily or otherwise, will start to taper off. It will just come later in the game for them, and this typically does give a window in the early game to overpower the competition. Time is usually not wasted on scrapping ships to keep the economy from diving. and they can send them directly to the front line to reinforce their positions for much of the early stages. With the scrap mechanic, at least in vanilla, all races reach a sort of parity when they peak with fleet size, provided they have enough star systems that can produce ships. For the less economically powerful major races, it may just take a bit longer to reach that tipping point. Of course, the map has only a limited number of systems, and even less of them will be capable to act as production centers. I just want to emphasize this, as fleet size is not truly unlimited in vanilla even with scrapping. Rather, it will depend on your industrial output from all viable shipbuilding systems. Otherwise, you need to acquire funds elsewhere, such as through tribute payments or raiding. Number 6. Phantom Dilithium. Dilithium, at least in vanilla and most mods, only constrains how many ships can be finished on any given turn. If there isn't enough supply, then the ships will stay in queue on one turn remaining, but only after you clear the shortage message first. Back in the day, people referred to this as phantom dilithium, but honestly, even if it's a bug, it actually both makes sense and makes the game more fair for majors that struggle with dilithium production. You might assume that having more ships in construction will completely stall production everywhere if the number exceeds the number of dilithium per turn. That is, until another dilithium mine is under control, but this just isn't the case. Shipyards will continue to build right up until there is only one turn remaining, in which it will then need a shipment of dilithium in order to finally launch the ship into service. Secondly, in order to override the dilithium shortage message, just cycle back and forth between systems using arrow keys on the keyboard. After this, you will be able to see how many turns of construction are left if you could hypothetically get enough dilithium by then. To conclude, getting dilithium is still a very important part of the game, with 2 mines being the bare minimum you ever want to have. But try not to let that discourage you from maximizing your ship production. You just want to cycle your production carefully as to not have more one-turn builds than you have dilithium. Unlike some of the other tips on this list, this is a rather easy one to remember. Some players might only allocate population to the intelligence sector after the first sign of trouble, but at that point, you may be already too late to stop a coming onslaught of sabotage and spies. If you quickly meet a Romulan or Cardassian opponent especially, your chances of being attacked in this fashion are quite high. Ideally, you should have a small fraction of population in the intel sector, starting turn 1, in order to build up some resistance to any early intel plays. In addition, you want at least 1 point on internal security at the bare minimum. This has commonly been referred to by longtime players as intel stockpiling, as it provides a bit of buffer from the first attempt to breach your security and buys you more time to prepare. Even 1 point in internal security can also trigger other benefits, as this enables any special intel bonus you have. The result is tons of points for free, just for having that 1% instead of 0%. This is something I explained more deeply in my last video, which I would recommend viewing if you haven't already. Number 8. Optimize the climb up the tech ladder. You might be compelled to blindly select a tech field on a whim, based solely on what you want to unlock in the tree, while not prioritizing any one in particular. Don't be fooled though. Technology's effect extends beyond unlocking new structures, upgrades, or ships. Many of these often have a soft impact, albeit a very immediate one, that can give you a small edge when timed correctly. Some are more obvious than others, such as the plus 2% production increase on factories with every level of tech, which even extends beyond Tech 10. Yes, you heard that right. Even future tech continues to give benefits. Same goes for biotech and energy, with their corresponding main structures. The subtle improvements also continue with the other fields of technology. Propulsion tech will always increase range of one range group with every new level, until Tech 11 anyway. This field is actually one of my favorites to prioritize in most games, as it gives that little extra boost to a fleet's power projection across the map. Then there is computer tech, which plays a small role in supporting intel successes. Last but certainly not least, every weapon tech level, from level 1 to infinity, increases the damage done by orbital batteries by 80 points. It also increases ground combat ability, which can be confirmed by reading the pop-up from your systems or troop transports. Lastly, there are some less significant buffs that come with tech, but they are interesting enough to give some attention to. Weapons tech, for example, will slightly increase weapon damage in a nearly imperceptible manner. Energy tech upgrades, on the other hand, will make planetary shields stronger, while construction tech slightly increases the resilience of structures against orbital bombardment. Anyway folks, that should conclude this Top 8 Basics guide. I hope you enjoyed it. To anyone that's subscribed, and you really should be if you're a hardcore BOTF fan, I just want to apologize that I've been on hiatus more time than originally planned, but I appreciate greatly if you stuck around. Do stay tuned if you enjoyed today's video. I plan the likes of faction-specific guides, modding updates, tournament announcements, and much more.
I said it before and I'll say it again. Life moves pretty fast. You don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.